Hello, Moss Flutists. I hope everybody is well. And for those who celebrated, I hope everyone had a great Easter weekend. So I thought we would start out this week kind of extending on what we talked about on the last video, which is articulations. Articulations in music are all about textures and bringing forth a lot of the different sort of timbral qualities of what it is that we play. So basically on our list of different types of articulations are many. Most of these articulations come from string playing, lots of different sorts of bowing styles. Slur is our first articulation that we're going to talk about today. And everybody knows what a slur is. The whole idea behind slurring is to connect notes in a very smooth sort of pattern. Most slurs start out with a two attack. Every once in a while, I might use a breath attack. We won't talk about that today. But slurs, again, completely connect. The notes themselves touch. Not all slurs are slow, not all slurs are fast. Slurs are just that. They're merely textural concepts in music. Next would be portatos. And you may have seen portatos, perhaps beginners not so much, but portatos in the fall of the year region materials. Portatos are indicated with a phrase marking and short lines, legato lines underneath. Typically, we'll use a do attack when articulating a portato, and the reason being is because we want to use a little bit more of the circumference of the tongue. So if I were to play the opening of our audition material using all portatos, a do attack, this is what it would sound like. So the notes don't quite all the way touch. They are not connected, but we use a do attack. Do, 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 do. So it puts a particular stress on the front of the note, but it doesn't have the notes touch. So it's very, very smooth. The notes are as long as they can possibly be. They're almost as connected as they possibly can be without actually touching. The next is détaché, and détaché, of course, is the most common articulation. We use our two attack. It's indicated by, well, nothing. You see a note on the page, but it doesn't have a slur marking. It doesn't have a portato or a staccato or a martelé marking. It's just a basic attack, a two attack. So if I would play the opening, again, of your audition material, space in between, that's what détaché means, detached, again using more of a two attack. And that's what we as musicians typically start out with. That's our basic attack, kind of the global universe two attacks, the centering. The next articulation is a martelé. And a martelé, again, it's a string bowing, little bit of a lift in between the notes. So more stress on the beginning, but a little bit of a tail, kind of like a comet. You can see the head of the comet very clearly, and then there's a bit of a tail on the notes. It's always indicated, or not always indicated, but there's two forms of indications with martelés, and that is a slur marking, which really acts like a phrase marking with dots underneath. These are not staccatos, but that's the indication. You might also see it with a legato marking, so a short line on top of a note head and a staccato underneath. Again, if I would play the opening of your audition material using martelés, this is what it would sound like. Using a two attack still. but a shorter two attack. Not very appropriate for this particular work, but martelés nonetheless. The next articulation would be just simple staccatos. Normally we use a tut attack. The reason for that is because we want the front of the note to have a good healthy and clear attack, and then we want to shorten it at the end. Staccatos are defined as notes that are short and separated. We can slur into staccatos, I'll indicate that in a second, but normally a tut attack. Again, if I do the opening of the piece, normally, and it depends on the style, it depends on the composer, it depends on the piece itself, but normally in band music, staccatos are defined as notes that are half their written value, followed by that same value in rest. Half the written value, followed by that same value in a rest or in a space. So for example, if you have an 8th note staccato, it's normally played as a 16th note, followed by a 16th rest. That does change with some more classical chamber music, perhaps. If you're playing with string players, that also changes. In solos also. It really depends on the composer and the stylistic interpretation. We also have what's called secco staccato. Secco itself means dry, very dry staccatos, very dry staccatos. Still using a tut attack, but a little bit quicker with the tongue, more of a pointed tongue. So again, inappropriate for this particular work, but a valid articulation nonetheless. So I said that I would kind of define slurred staccatos. Sometimes we have a passage in music where we have a slur and the last note of the slur has a staccato in it. That's a slurred staccato, which means that we connect that note to the rest of the notes, but we cut it short. The short part has to do with what comes after the staccato, not what comes before the staccato. Staccatos are not defined as tongued notes. Short notes, yes. What that was slurs into a staccato. If you noticed, I made them very short, separated from what came up next. But I slurred into them. So articulations are so important in music because they give us variety. We talked in the last video about ingredients if we cook or if we bake and how important those are. So if you're going to be baking something and a recipe specifically calls for powdered sugar, for example, you don't want to use granulated sugar because it's not part of the recipe and could turn out to be kind of a baking disaster. So it's the same thing with articulations in music. Your audition music, kind of going back to that and referring back to that, has quite a few different articulations to it. You definitely have more détachés than anything. You do have a few slurs, not too many. Ties, definitely, but ties are not articulations. They're part of rhythm. The very first note is a legato marking, That would also use a do attack like we talked about in the portato. The very first note has a legato. I'm assuming because of the fact that the second note is also the same exact note name, 2 E flats, not wanting students to breathe after the first note. There you have a slur that moves you through to the ultimate beat, which is beat 3 of the second measure. You do have some staccatos as well. Again, not too many. However, I would say from the standpoint of interpretation, making sure that those staccatos are worthy. Measure 5. I think I might have added a slur to measure 6. I just like a slur there. Don't add that. In measure 13, while not an articulation, it certainly does stress this syncopated area. What I would do is give it a little bit of lift, maybe more on the lines of a martelé, just a nice lift without making it staccato. 16, very important that the staccatos, that texture, help you with your rhythm. That can really help with your counting. 1 and 3, and then off on that 4th beat rest. And then the rest of the piece is all détaché. So I think a great thing for beginners to do is perhaps use your Essential Elements book or anything that's on Smart Music. Change your articulations around just to do something different and fun, to experiment with different textures. For more advanced students, you can use the Blue Book and just, again, change articulations around. Experiment with do attacks, experiment with tot attacks. It makes music just so much more filled with more variety. And it means that when you have to play those articulations, perhaps in a piece or a solo or an etude, or perhaps you're being asked to play scales in different sort of textures, you can just pull that out of your toolkit and use it. So happy fluting to everyone. Stay safe and stay healthy, and see you next time.